Drake is currently experiencing one of the biggest meltdowns of his career, all because his latest collaboration album with PartyNextDoor SSS4U is performing terribly. This is a side of Drake we've never seen before, and instead of taking accountability or analyzing what went wrong with the album and this entire era of his career, he's choosing to blame everyone but himself. What he's doing right now is truly the ultimate form of defeat. Rather than reflecting on his decisions and making adjustments, Drake is resorting to desperate attempts to distract from the album's failure. Before we dive deeper into just how far he's going to shift the blame, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. As I've mentioned in previous videos, Drake fans are still mad at me, and they don't want you to hear what I have to say. So, if you want the truth about this situation, make sure to support the channel. It really helps out a ton. Now, back to what is already shaping up to be Drake's worst album release ever. SSS4U has made it clear that Drake's career trajectory is heading downhill fast. It's shocking to see an artist as massive as Drake reach a point where he has lost so much, his dominance, his creative edge, and his audience, yet he continues to double down on the same losing strategy that put him in this position. Instead of adapting, he delivered an album at a critical moment in his career, using the exact approach that has been failing him for over a year. As a result, the numbers for SSS4U have been disastrous. The album opened with half the streams that For All the Dogs did, and in the following days, the streaming numbers only got worse. This is officially the lowest performing album of Drake's career. The problem isn't just the numbers, though, it's the music itself. The album contains some of the worst lines Drake has ever written, and naturally, people aren't listening. At this point, the question isn't just about this album flopping, it's about what this means for Drake's future. If this is where he's at now, what's next? Will he finally take a step back and reassess his approach, or will he continue spiraling down this path? Who even wanted this album in the first place? Instead of accepting the reality that he released a project nobody asked for, Drake is doing everything he can to avoid facing the fact that SSS4U is a complete failure. Meanwhile, Kendrick Lamar is reaching all-time levels of success. Whether it's his classic albums or his new music, Kendrick's impact on hip-hop is undeniable right now. Thanks to his own talent and the momentum from the Super Bowl, he's dominating the charts while Drake is experiencing an all-time low. Now, instead of admitting that his time at the top is over and that he's no longer among the biggest names in rap or music as a whole, Drake has resorted to a new way of coping. After witnessing the flop of his album with PartyNextDoor, while Kendrick continues to thrive, Drake won't openly address his failures, but his actions speak for themselves. He's been using his friend DJ Academics to push specific narratives, engaging with posts that rile up his fanbase against the music industry instead of making them question his decisions. Drake wants his fans to believe that SSS4U is flopping because the industry is suppressing him. According to his narrative, they aren't just blocking his numbers, they're artificially inflating Kendrick Lamar's success. But let's be real, the only thing happening here is that Drake is no longer benefiting from the industry's inflated push. His relationship with major labels and streaming platforms has clearly changed, largely due to his own decisions and actions. What's really happening isn't suppression, it's that, for the first time in his career, Drake is on the same playing field as every other rapper. His success now depends on the actual quality of his music and how much people genuinely connect with it. And that's why this is so obvious. While Drake is scrambling for excuses, Kendrick Lamar's numbers continue to rise simply because his music deserves the success it's getting. Drake can keep shifting the blame, but at the end of the day, the truth is clear: his downfall is entirely his own doing. Drake is trying to push the narrative that he's being forced out of the industry, and that no one is supporting his latest album. But if you actually look at the facts instead of his claims, the truth is obvious. SSS4U was heavily promoted. It was featured on the cover of every major streaming platform, placed prominently in the biggest rap and R&B playlists, and given the same exposure as other top releases. Despite all this, Drake is still trying to convince his fans that the industry is against him. However, just like when Family Matters and Not Like Us dropped, these platforms simply let the audience decide what they actually want to listen to. Based on listener engagement, It's clear that Kendrick Lamar's catalog and new diss tracks have generated far more attention than SSS4U. Streaming services didn't push Kendrick over Drake. They simply responded to what people chose to play. The more listeners engage with an album, the more platforms promote it. This is how the algorithm works at the highest level, and Drake's attempt to shift blame is nothing more than damage control. The reality is that SSS4U flopped because people just weren't interested. Instead of acknowledging this, Drake is trying to frame it as industry suppression, using Kendrick Lamar, GNX, and streaming services as scapegoats to justify his failure. This allows him to avoid accountability and buy time with his fans, convincing them that external forces, not his music, are to blame. To make this argument even more absurd, just compare SSS4U to another recent collab album in hip-hop, Vulture's One. That album was actually suppressed. It was removed from platforms, hidden from search results, and left off curated playlists, major factors that typically boost a project's visibility. Listeners had to search directly for the album since it wasn't being promoted at all. Meanwhile, SSS4U had every advantage and still flopped. No amount of blame shifting can change the fact that the music just didn't connect with people the way Drake hoped it would. Drake's attempt to claim SSS4U was suppressed by the industry only highlights how badly the album has failed. The reality is, people just don't care about this project. Vulture's One didn't just outperform SSS4U during its opening days, it became a #1 album and produced a #1 song with Carnival. If Drake's claims of suppression were true, how did Vulture's One thrive despite real industry pushback, while SSS4U flopped even with full support? If you compare these two albums, it's obvious that Drake is pushing a false narrative. SSS4U was heavily promoted by the industry, featured on streaming covers, and placed in top rap and R&B playlists. Meanwhile, Vulture's One faced real suppression, getting pulled from platforms and hidden from search results. The difference is clear. Drake's album simply failed to connect with listeners. The truth is, SSS4U isn't being suppressed. It's just not a good album, and people don't care about it. Drake has lost the core audience that once tuned in no matter what. In rap, Kendrick Lamar has completely redefined the mainstream standard with GNX, which is still producing chart-topping hits while SSS4U fades fast. Even outside of hip-hop, the R&B space is highly competitive. With artists like SZA and The Weeknd dominating, SSS4U couldn't stand out. Fans have simply chosen to support better music. Compare SSS4U to albums like GNX, Lana, or Hurry Up Tomorrow, and it quickly becomes obvious why Drake's latest effort isn't resonating. Instead of blaming the industry, Drake needs to face reality. His formula isn't working anymore. The music world has moved forward, and SSS4U is proof that his influence is fading fast. The reason all these albums are outperforming Drake's SSS4U is simple. They offer a far better listening experience. What's baffling is that Drake had time to analyze his competition, compare his work to the biggest names in the industry, and still failed to deliver. When people look back at Drake's downfall, one thing will be clear: he never truly estimated his competition. For years, Drake could drop subpar music and still win, but that's no longer the case. He assumed that just because a project had his name on it, it would succeed, regardless of whether it was competing with one of the greatest diss tracks of all time from Kendrick, one of the biggest rap albums in years, or a highly anticipated R&B album from The Weeknd. But that mindset led him straight to failure. Drake entered one of the most competitive moments in music history with what was essentially a collection of For All the Dogs and CLB throwaways with PartyNextDoor added to them. His failure to create not just good, but engaging music, combined with the fact that he's no longer getting the industry's unfair boost, has left him with only himself to blame. The music world has moved on. The industry no longer treats his mid-tier releases as the standard, and his outdated strategies no longer work. Now, Drake is blaming Kendrick Lamar and GNX for his album's failure, trying to frame it as industry manipulation. But in reality, Kendrick isn't the reason SSS4U flopped because of suppression. He's the reason because he made a better album. The game has changed, and Drake refused to evolve with it. Kendrick Lamar has simply delivered a much better musical experience, and fans are responding in overwhelming numbers. With his influence skyrocketing, especially after his Super Bowl impact, hip-hop is expanding into new boundaries like never before. Kendrick now has over 100 million monthly listeners, making history as the most streamed rapper, proving that hip-hop and music as a whole have moved on from Drake. Fans are gravitating towards more captivating and high-quality work, and Drake is struggling to keep up with this new reality. Instead of acknowledging this shift, Drake is desperately trying to control the narrative, refusing to accept responsibility for his own shortcomings. As more numbers come in and the failure of his album becomes more undeniable, he will likely double down on blaming everyone but himself. His team and figures like academics will continue amplifying this false idea that the industry is against him, but the truth is clear. Drake's music is simply not connecting with people the way it once did. No matter how hard he tries to twist the facts, he cannot change reality. What's even more frustrating for him is that the industry isn't suppressing him. His album was promoted across all major streaming platforms and featured heavily in rap and R&B playlists. Yet, despite all of this, the numbers are worse than anyone could have expected. The reason is simple: fans prefer better music, and right now, that's not coming from Drake. The same audience that once supported him no matter what is now tuning in elsewhere. Whether it's Kendrick Lamar setting a new standard with GNX or R&B stars like The Weeknd dominating their lane, Drake's formula is outdated, and he refuses to change. As Drake continues making excuses instead of evolving, get ready for this to become the new status quo. His decline will only get worse. So, what do you think? Is Drake being pushed out, or is he just losing a fair game? Let me know in the comments. And if you made it this far, be sure to like and subscribe, it helps a lot. Also, check out the suggested video to see how Drake's reaction is making his album's failure even worse.